Look at you, acting important. You don't belong up here, do you hear me? People like you sit in the back, or you get the hell off my plane.
The cabin is silent except for one voice. A white female pilot storms out of the cockpit, jabs her finger inches from a black man's face, and spits out, "You do not belong in this seat." Passengers in suits freeze, some lifting their phones to record. The man does not flinch. His jaw tightens, his eyes stay cold. Then he leans in and answers slowly, "I paid for this seat. I own this plane, and your job is on the line." 20 minutes before anyone was shouting in the cabin, the black CEO sat alone in a quiet corner of the VIP lounge. No entourage, no designer suit screaming for attention, just a plain blue shirt, dark slacks, a carry-on by his chair, and a tablet glowing with charts from his company. The people walking past saw another tired traveler. No one saw the man who signed paychecks for thousands of employees and owned the jet he was about to board. He skimmed through a contract, pausing to answer a call from his operations director. Fuel costs, new routes, negotiations with investors, the kind of problems most passengers on today's flight could only read about in business magazines. His voice stayed calm, measured, the way it always did when things were on fire behind the scenes. "Run the numbers again. We do not cut safety. We cut ego," he said quietly, then ended the call and checked the time. At the reception desk, 2 lounge attendants were whispering while they glanced at him. One of them frowned at the boarding pass scanner. "Are you sure he's first class?" she muttered. "The system says yes," the other replied, "but maybe it's a mistake or a last-minute upgrade. Look at him, he's probably in economy." They didn't bother to lower their voices as much as they thought. He heard enough to understand the tone, if not every word. Years of similar moments had trained his ears. He walked up to the desk anyway, boarding pass in hand. "Good afternoon," he said. "Flight 217, seat 1A. His voice was polite, neutral. The first attendant gave a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes and took the pass with 2 fingers, as if it were slightly suspicious. The scanner beeped green at once. "There seems to be a technical glitch with our system today," she said, even though nothing had glitched. "Please wait over there for a moment while we verify your seat, sir." He tilted his head. "Is there something wrong with the reservation?" No, just standard procedure," she lied. Behind him, a white businessman in an expensive blazer stepped up, talking loudly on his phone about mergers and golf trips. The same attendant who had just stalled the black CEO suddenly turned bright and bubbly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Palmer. You are all set in first class. We will start boarding you first, of course." The black CEO watched the scene unfold with a small, tired smile. He had seen this movie before. The names and faces changed, the script rarely did. Still, he reminded himself, this was his company's jet. The logo on the wall, the staff uniforms, even the scanner at the desk existed because he had once sat in a cramped apartment sketching plans on a coffee-stained notebook. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a notification from the corporate app. Flight 217, owner on board. It was an automated tag on the manifest, a tiny line of code he had insisted on, not for ego, but for accountability. Somewhere in the control center, a screen had just lit up with his name. The people in this lounge had no idea. He checked the time again. If the delay at the desk stretched much longer, he would miss the chance to review documents before takeoff. "How long will this verification take?" he asked, still soft-spoken. "It will only be a minute," the attendant replied, already turning her attention back to the louder man in the blazer. A minute stretched into 5. Boarding announcements echoed through the lounge. First-class passengers for Flight 217 may now proceed to the gate. The loud businessman was ushered through with smiles and small talk. Only when the line thinned did the attendant finally wave the black CEO forward, as if doing him a favor. "All right, sir, you can go now." He took back his boarding pass, met her eyes for a brief second, and gave a nod that was polite but distant. He did not remind her that his signature was printed on her employee contract. He simply turned toward the gate, mind already shifting from microaggressions to flight safety, unaware that within the next half hour, her casual disrespect and the crew's quiet assumptions would pull an entire plane back to the ground and end several careers in a single afternoon. By the time he reached the gate, the monitor above it was already flashing pre-boarding. A short line of business travelers had formed, dark suits, rolling bags, the same tired confidence you see in airport lounges everywhere. The black CEO joined the line, boarding pass for seat 1A open on his phone. Pre-boarding for passengers needing extra assistance, the agent announced. A few people went through. Then came, "We now welcome our first-class passengers and elite members." He took a step forward. The gate agent lifted a hand without looking up. "Not yet, sir. We're boarding our premium guests first." He glanced at his screen again, just to make sure he had not imagined the words first class. The code for priority boarding was right there. "My seat is 1A, he said quietly. "I believe that qualifies." The agent finally looked up, scanned his pass, and frowned for a second longer than necessary. "Huh, that is odd," she murmured. "Please wait to the side, sir. It may be an error." Behind him, the same white businessman from the lounge strode up, still on his phone, laughing loudly about closing a deal. The agent's face brightened. "Welcome back, Mr. Palmer. You are in 1A this evening, correct? You can board right away. Enjoy your flight." The black CEO heard every word. The agent did not even glance at the screen in her hand before assigning the seat. She simply assumed. Mr. Palmer walked past with a quick, dismissive look, the kind people give to someone they believe has lost and should accept it. The CEO's phone vibrated again, a reminder of his meeting on the other coast, the one this flight was supposed to deliver him to on time. He dismissed the alert and studied the logo on the jet outside the window, his own company's colors painted along the fuselage. He had chosen that shade years ago because it looked calm and trustworthy. Today, it felt like a silent witness. "Sir," the agent called at last, still sounding mildly annoyed, as if he had caused a problem by staying. "You may board, but there may be a seat change. The crew will assist you." He walked down the jet bridge, each step echoing a history he knew too well. The small hesitations, the second guesses, the quiet message beneath the words. "You do not look like the person who belongs in front." He had turned those moments into fuel his entire life, but they still stung. At the door of the aircraft, a senior flight attendant greeted passengers with a trained smile. She glanced at his boarding pass and saw the seat number. The smile thinned. "Good evening, sir. 1A?" she repeated, as if testing the phrase. "Would you mind waiting here in the galley for just a moment while I check something?" He stepped to the side, feeling the close walls of the narrow entryway around him. Behind him, more passengers squeezed past, brushing his shoulder on their way to their places. The flight attendant disappeared up the aisle, then leaned over one of the first rows. He could not hear the words, only the tone, apologetic, accommodating, deferential. She returned a minute later. "There appears to be a duplication in the system," she said. "The gentleman seated in 1A has flown with us frequently. We may need to reassign you to another seat. It is still in the premium cabin, of course." He let the silence hang for a moment. The engines outside hummed. Somewhere toward the back, a child laughed. "You put him in my seat," the black CEO said finally, voice low, "without checking, and now you are asking me to be the one who moves." The flight attendant shifted her weight, eyes flicking toward the cockpit door as if looking for backup. "It will just be for this flight, sir. I am sure you will find the other seat comfortable." He looked past her, down the aisle lined with leather seats and polished armrests, toward the place he knew was his. "Show me," he said. She hesitated, then turned and led the way. As they stepped into the first-class cabin, the conversation of the passengers softened, curiosity replacing small talk. At row 1, the man in the expensive blazer lounged with a drink in hand, his shoes already off, his bag occupying the overhead space. The black CEO stopped at the edge of the row, taking in the scene. His seat number glowed on the digital panel above Mr. Palmer's head. The crew had rearranged the world to fit their assumption. For a long heartbeat, nobody said anything. The black CEO stood at the edge of row 1, one hand on the seat back in front of him, eyes shifting between the glowing 1A on the panel and the man already settled there. The hum of the air vents and the faint clink of ice in glasses filled the gap where someone should have apologized. Palmer finally looked up, as if just noticing him. "Can I help you?" he asked, impatience already hanging on the words. "That is my seat," the CEO replied, calm and level. He angled his boarding pass slightly so the row of digits was visible. 1A. Palmer glanced at the pass, then at the flight attendant, and let out a short, amused breath. "There must be some mistake. They just told me I was in 1A. I fly this route all the time." He took a sip of his drink and added, almost as an afterthought, "They wouldn't bump me." The flight attendant shifted closer to Palmer than to the CEO, hands folded in front of her. "Sir," she said to the CEO, "as I explained, the system made a duplicate assignment. Mr. Palmer is one of our top-tier frequent flyers. We have another excellent seat for you just a few rows back. You will still receive full service." Her tone held the gentle firmness of someone used to smoothing egos, but the message was clear. You are the one who moves. The CEO studied her for a moment. He noticed the way her jaw tightened when she looked at him, the tiny crease between her brows, the stiffness in her stance. This was not a neutral problem to her. It was an inconvenience she wanted removed. He could feel several sets of eyes on him from nearby seats. A man across the aisle pretended to scroll his phone while staring. A woman 3 rows back leaned out just enough to see around the headrest. Even without cameras raised, the cabin felt like a small stage. "I paid for this seat," he said quietly, but every syllable was audible. "The system did not upgrade me as a favor. This is my reservation." Palmer set his glass down harder than necessary, the ice chiming. "And I am sure they can sort something out for you," he said. "You heard her. I have status. The airline knows who its real customers are." He smiled, a sharp, sideways thing that never reached his eyes. "You will be comfortable back there." The word "back" hung in the air longer than it should have. Something inside the CEO tightened. He thought about the meeting waiting for him on the other coast, about the young managers who would be watching his every move for examples of how to handle disrespect without losing control. He thought about all the times he had swallowed moments like this, all the times he had told himself it was not the hill to die on. Very slowly, he sat down on the armrest of the empty seat across the aisle and opened his phone. His thumb slid over the corporate app, not the public airline one the crew assumed he had. A live roster of flights appeared, including this one. Next to the flight number, a small tag glowed, "Owner on board." He tapped a secure chat channel labeled Operations Control. "Boarding issue on Flight 217, he typed. "Cabin crew reassigned my booked first-class seat to another passenger based on status and appearance. No verification. I am currently being asked to move to accommodate him. Documenting." He attached a quick photo of his boarding pass with the seat number visible, then another of the panel above row 1. He did not include faces. Yet. Beside him, the flight attendant cleared her throat, eager to bring this awkward pause to an end. "Sir, we really need to finish seating everyone so we can depart on time," she said. "If you do not wish the alternate seat, we can ask you to step off this flight and arrange a later one." The threat was delivered in a smooth, almost bored tone. She had probably said those words 100 times to unruly travelers. She just did not realize who she was saying them to now. He looked up from the phone, expression unreadable. "You are asking me," he repeated slowly, "to either sit in a different seat than the one I paid for, or get off the plane." "Yes, sir," she answered. "Those are your options." Palmer leaned back, satisfied, adjusting his headrest. "You are making this more complicated than it needs to be," he muttered. "Take the other seat or catch the next flight. Some of us have real business to attend to." The CEO's fingers curled slightly around his phone. For a moment, he considered doing what he had done in the past. Take the lesser seat, make a mental note, address it in a quiet meeting later where no one would see the insult that had come before the apology. Instead, he exhaled slowly and stood. His voice, when he spoke, carried to the surrounding rows with unfussy clarity. "All right," he said, "I will sit where you assign me for now, but understand this." He paused, letting the silence pull eyes toward him. "Every second of how you have handled this will be reviewed by people above your pay grade, and this time there will be consequences." The attendant blinked, thrown for a second by the weight in his tone. Palmer rolled his eyes, assuming it was just a dramatic threat from an overconfident passenger. The black CEO followed the attendant down the aisle to his alternate seat, phone still in hand, the message to operations already marked as seen. Somewhere far from this cabin, someone in a control room was now watching Flight 21 status feed with new attention. The crew, wrapped in their routine assumptions, had no idea their casual decision had just triggered a chain that would pull this plane back to the ground. The alternate seat they gave him was still in the premium cabin, but the difference was obvious. Instead of the open, spacious bulkhead of row 1, he was tucked a few rows back, close enough to hear the galley clatter and feel people brushing past. The label on the headrest was different. The message was different too. He slid into the seat without complaining, buckled his belt, and set his phone on the armrest. From here, he could see the top of Mr. Palmer's head and the subtle angle of the first row, just enough to be a reminder. The attendant gave him a quick nod that was meant to say, "Problem solved," and moved away before he could respond. On his phone, a new message had appeared in the operations chat. "We see the manifest tag," the duty manager wrote. "Are you reporting a service issue as owner or as passenger only?" The owner replied, "Service issue looks like bias and deliberate reassignment of paid seat. The cabin crew threatened to remove me if I did not comply. Documenting for HR and safety. Do not alert them yet. Observe." A typing bubble blinked, then vanished. Whoever was on the other end had just realized this was no ordinary complaint from a frequent flyer. Up front, the senior attendant leaned into the cockpit, keeping her voice low. "We had a seating dispute at first," she said. "Guy in business clothes insisted he had 1A, but the system had Mr. Palmer there. He resisted moving. I had to tell him his options were another seat or the next flight. He backed down, but keeping an eye on him. Could be trouble later." The captain listened with one ear while finishing his checklist. His focus was on weather charts and fuel, not passenger drama. Beside him, the first officer, a woman with years of flight time but still fighting for respect in a male-dominated cockpit, frowned. "Where is he now?" she asked. 3 rows back in premium, still looks annoyed, the attendant said. "It is always the ones who think they deserve more than they paid for." The first officer shook her head, the picture already forming in her mind. Entitled passenger, chip on his shoulder, potential safety headache once they were airborne. She had dealt with drunk executives, men who refused to follow instructions, people who turned small slights into shouting matches at 30,000 feet. The story slid neatly into that category before she ever laid eyes on him. "Log it," the captain said. "If he escalates, we deal with it then. For now, we need to get out on time." The cabin lights dimmed a fraction as the door closed. Safety demos played. The black CEO watched, half listening, while his phone vibrated one more time. "Copy operations," written. "We are recording this under the owner report. Flight is being monitored. We recommend you do not engage in argument unless necessary for safety. We will support any decision you make regarding crew conduct once on ground." He locked the screen and slid the device into his pocket. The irony was not lost on him. The people most trained to handle crisis calmly were seated on the ground, watching numbers on a screen, while the ones on this aircraft had just turned a simple seating verification into a small humiliation. As the engine spooled up, the murmur of conversation around him shifted. The man in the window seat beside him, a middle-aged traveler in headphones, glanced at his boarding pass, still resting on the armrest. "Rough start," he said quietly, lifting one ear pad. "You could say that," the CEO answered. "I saw them move you from up front," the man continued. "For what it is worth, I heard the gate. They pulled you aside and waved that other guy through. Did not seem right." He hesitated, then added, "If anyone asks later, I will tell them exactly what I saw." "Thank you," the CEO said. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Witnesses changed narratives. He had learned that in boardrooms and in life. The plane pushed back from the gate. A gentle vibration rolled through the cabin as they taxied. Up ahead, the first officer glanced at the cabin status panel. A small icon glowed amber next to a seat number in premium. the manual flag the senior attendant had set when she marked him internally as a difficult passenger. "Is that our guy?" she asked. "Yeah," the attendant's voice came through on the interphone. "He is quiet now, but something about his attitude. If he starts anything during the climb, we may need a firm talk." The first officer looked once more at the amber light, then at the runway ahead. Her job was to keep metal and lives safe, but another part of her had been taught over years: do not let anyone challenge cockpit authority. A stranger who already resisted instructions sat 3 rows behind the bulkhead. As they held short of the runway, an incoming message pinged in the cockpit printer, unusual at this stage. It was from Operations Control, flagged high priority. "The owner on board has filed bias and safety concerns regarding first-class seat reassignment on this flight. Treat all interactions with care. Incident under review." The first officer read it, felt a flicker of surprise, then irritation. "Great," she muttered. So he pulled that card. To her, the word owner on paper meant someone who thought rules worked differently for him. The captain skimmed the note. "We will stick to procedure. But if he interferes with safety, it does not matter what title he has." They lined up on the runway, engines roaring. Back in premium, the black CEO pressed his head against the seat and closed his eyes as the aircraft surged forward. He was not looking for a fight. He wanted a safe, on-time flight and a fair, simple acknowledgement of a wrong made right. He had no way of knowing that a few rows ahead, the woman controlling the climb-out was already picturing him as a problem to contain, not a customer to respect. The misunderstanding that began with a seat number was about to turn into a confrontation that would drag the whole plane back to the gate and crack open several careers along the way. 10 minutes after takeoff, the cabin lights softened and the climb smoothed into cruise. The seatbelt sign chimed off. People reached for laptops and drinks, settling into their airborne routines. On the surface, everything looked normal again. In row 3, the black CEO opened his tablet, more out of habit than focus. The numbers on the screen blurred together. He could still feel the echo of the earlier exchange in his chest, a slow burn rather than a sharp flame. Across the aisle, the man who had offered to be a witness earlier gave him a small nod, as if to say, "I saw what they did." In the galley, the senior attendant was already rewriting the story. "He was aggressive from the start," she whispered to a colleague while stacking glasses, demanding, pushing back on every explanation. "I had to remind him we can take him off the flight if necessary. If he starts again, I am calling the cockpit." The colleague raised an eyebrow. What did he do exactly? "He refused to accept a perfectly good seat and kept insisting that the front row belonged to him," she said. "The entitlement is off the charts." By the time that version reached the cockpit, it had picked up a few extra edges. Over the interphone, her tone sharpened. "He is still giving me attitude," she told the first officer. "He keeps mentioning consequences and people above my pay grade. I really think we have a potential problem passenger here." The first officer felt her patience thin. She was responsible for hundreds of lives and had no interest in a showdown at 35,000 feet. "All right," she said, "I will talk to him. If there is any sign he will not follow instructions, we go back. I am not gambling with safety." Unbuckling, she stepped out of the cockpit, the door closing softly behind her. The shift from instruments and checklists to cabin air was always jarring. Warm light, perfume, a faint mix of coffee and reheated meals. As she walked down the aisle, heads turned. Some passengers recognized the uniform and immediately straightened. Others sensed tension before they knew why. Row 3 came into view. The black CEO was sitting upright, tablet in his lap, hands loosely clasped. He did not look drunk, loud, or unstable. He looked like half the executives she had flown over the years. But the story she had heard wrapped itself around her perception before she even spoke. "Sir," she said, stopping beside his seat, using the formal tone reserved for firm conversations. "I am the first officer on this flight. I understand there was an issue during boarding." He looked up, taking in the bars on her shoulders, the practiced set of her face. "There was a seat reassignment," he answered. "Your crew gave my paid seat to another passenger and threatened to remove me when I asked them to fix it." A few nearby passengers went very still. The man next to him pulled his headphones fully off now. The first officer folded her arms, keeping her voice controlled. "My crew tells me you refused to comply with their instructions and became verbally confrontational. That concerns me. Anything that interferes with cabin crew authority is a safety issue." He held her gaze. "What I refused," he said evenly, "was to quietly accept being pushed out of a seat I paid for so that someone they preferred could have it. I did not raise my voice. I did not refuse safety instructions. I asked for fairness." Her jaw twitched. "You need to understand," she replied. "Once the doors are closed, the captain and crew have full authority. If they assign you a seat, you take it. If they give you directions, you follow them. If you threaten consequences, that can be interpreted as disruptive behavior." Behind her, a phone screen tilted subtly upward. Someone had begun recording. The first officer noticed, but chose not to address it yet. "Is asking for what you purchased now considered a threat?" he asked. "Or is it only a threat when it comes from the wrong person in the wrong row?" The cabin seemed to inhale. The question was not shouted, but it hung there like a challenge to more than one person in a uniform. She straightened a little. "This is not about race or status," she said quickly. "This is about safety and compliance." "You are the first one to bring those words," he replied. "I brought boarding passes and a reservation. Your team brought assumptions." For a heartbeat, the two of them simply looked at each other. In her mind, she saw every difficult passenger she had ever dealt with, all the times she had been told to smile more while being second-guessed in a job she had earned. In his, he saw years of being told to be grateful for being let into spaces he had built, years of being asked to make himself smaller so other people could stay comfortable. "Here is what is going to happen," she said finally, slipping into the clipped cadence she used when making tough calls. "We will continue to our destination if and only if I am confident there will be no further challenges to crew authority. If you cannot assure me of that, we will return to the gate and you will not remain on this aircraft. Do you understand?" The wording was careful, but the subtext was obvious enough for anyone within 2 rows to hear. "You are the problem, and we can make you disappear." He took a slow breath, then another, feeling a line inside him he had crossed only a few times in his life. "I understand perfectly," he said. "You are telling the owner of this plane that pointing out discrimination is a bigger threat to safety than the discrimination itself." She blinked. "Owner?" she repeated, skepticism flashing across her face. "Sir, exaggerating your importance does not help your case." He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Instead, he reached into his pocket and tapped his phone awake, but did not show her the screen yet. "You are very sure of the story you have been told about me," he said quietly. "Before you decide I am the danger on this flight, you might want to verify who you are actually talking to." A few rows back, another phone came up, now openly filming. The man beside him looked from the pilot to the CEO and shook his head slowly. The air in the cabin tightened, the way it does right before turbulence. The first officer could feel control of the narrative slipping, and that, more than anything, made her press harder. "Last time," she said, "will you agree right now to follow every crew direction without argument for the rest of this flight?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached down, unbuckled his belt, and rose to his feet, moving with deliberate, unhurried precision. Conversations nearby died away completely. "I will agree to follow every lawful safety instruction," he said, "but I will not agree to pretend that what happened at that front row did not happen, and I will not agree to let this end with your version of the story being the only one recorded." Somewhere in the back, a call button chimed. Up front, a storm had just formed in the narrow space between a man in a simple blue shirt and the woman who believed she was protecting her aircraft. Neither of them knew yet that the decision she was about to make would not just reroute a flight, it would reroute her career. For a few seconds, it felt like the entire cabin was holding its breath. The black CEO stood in the narrow space by his row, the first officer planted in the aisle in front of him, shoulders squared. 2 uniforms. One carried stripes on her epaulets. The other carried authority she could not see yet. He lifted his phone just enough for her to glimpse the screen. On it, the internal operations app was open, not the public one passengers used. At the top was the company logo, and beneath it a profile tile with his photo, name, and title in clean letters. Founder and Chief Executive Officer, primary owner. "This is the airline you are flying for," he said. "This is my account. This aircraft is part of a fleet I built. You are speaking to the person whose name is on the documents that keep it in the sky." Her eyes flickered to the screen, then back to his face. Training and ego fought behind her expression. She had seen rich passengers bluff before, waving business cards and threats. But this was not a screenshot of a LinkedIn page. This was a live feed from an app she recognized but had never been allowed to log into. Behind them, someone whispered, "Wait, is he serious?" Another passenger muttered, "I knew something was off when they moved him." The sound of a phone recording quietly continued, the tiny click of digital zoom. The first officer's voice dropped half a register. "Even if that is true," she said, "on this flight, I am responsible for safety. Ownership does not override cockpit authority. If you undermine my crew, you put that safety at risk." He nodded slowly. "I agree with you about authority," he replied. "What I don't agree with is your definition of risk. Bias is a safety issue. Humiliation is a safety issue. When my crew decides who belongs in the front based on their reflection, not the manifest, that is a threat to the culture that keeps planes from falling out of the sky." It was not the answer she expected. Something in it made her bristle, but another part of her heard the weight of someone who had sat through too many post-incident reviews. "Right now," she said, choosing each word, "the incident I see is you standing, challenging me in front of other passengers and refusing to give a clear yes to a simple question. That is the threat I am trained to respond to." The man in the neighboring seat cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I watched what happened from the gate to here. He has not raised his voice once. He just wants what he paid for. If anyone reviews the footage, they are going to see that." The first officer turned a brief, sharp look on him. "Sir, I am addressing a safety concern. Please remain seated and allow me to do my job." She faced the CEO again. "Last opportunity," she said. "If you cannot give me an unqualified yes, I have to treat you as a disruptive passenger. That means going back to the gate. That decision is mine and the captain's, not yours, regardless of what your title is." He studied her, the thin line of resolve at the corners of her mouth, the way her hand rested on the seat top with just a hint of tremor. She was not just guarding rules, she was guarding her sense of control in a sky where chaos could be lethal. But in this moment, her need to assert that control was blinding her to what was actually out of line. "Then make the call," he said finally. "If your judgment tells you that the problem on this aircraft is the person asking for policies to be followed, not the people who bent them, make the call. But understand this too." He tipped the phone so she could see the active call icon now sliding onto the screen. He had already tapped a contact labeled Ops Director. The line was ringing. "Whatever you decide up there," he continued, "will not be reviewed in a vacuum. It will be reviewed alongside every word, every choice, every assumption that turned a paid seat into a confrontation. I am not walking quietly into your version of this story." For the first time, uncertainty cracked her expression. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then turned slightly toward the front of the cabin. "Return to your seat while I consult with the captain," she said, defaulting to procedure. "I will," he agreed, lowering himself deliberately, buckling his belt with a loud click that carried to the nearby rows. "And I will follow every lawful safety instruction, but I am also staying on this call." As he settled back, the ops director answered in his ear. "I am on," a calm voice said. "We have been watching the flight. Tell me what just happened." He kept his voice even, factual, aware that at least 2 phones around him were still recording. He described the gate, the reassignment, the threat of removal, and now the ultimatum from the cockpit. On the other end, the director did not interrupt. The quiet was not indifference, but the sound of someone building a timeline in real time. Up front, the first officer strode back to the cockpit, every step feeling heavier than the last. Once the door closed and the lock engaged, the captain turned his chair slightly. "Report," he said. She relayed the interaction, leaving out none of the key points. She mentioned his claim of ownership, the phone app, the refusal to give a simple yes. Her voice carried a thread of frustration. "If we let this continue and he escalates later, it is on us," she finished. "I would rather take the hit for being overcautious than for ignoring a warning sign." The captain listened, then reached for the printed message from operations still clipped near his knee. "The owner on board has filed bias and safety concerns. Incident under review." "They are already watching us," he said. "If he really is who he says he is, and we drag him off this plane on video, we are not just dealing with a rowdy customer, we are dealing with a board-level crisis." "Or we are dealing with someone using that word to intimidate us," she shot back. "I cannot fly with a person who will not give a clear commitment to follow instructions. That cuts across everything else." He rubbed a hand across his jaw, weighing 2 different kinds of risk. Out the windshield, a panorama of clouds glowed white against the blue. On his instruments, the flight track arced cleanly toward their destination. In the cabin, tension had turned the air thick. "Options," he said at last. "We can continue and hope it cools down. We can divert to a closer airport, or we can go back to origin where operations and security can meet the plane." "Turning around sends a message we do not tolerate pushback on crew authority," she said. "And if he is what he claims, that message might be the only thing I have left to defend. I will not be the pilot who shrugged off trouble because someone waved status at me." He looked at her for a long moment. She was not wrong about the seriousness of cabin challenges, but she was not seeing that sometimes authority and ego wore the same uniform. Finally, he exhaled. "All right," he said. "We are returning to origin. I will cite concerns over a non-compliant passenger and potential safety disruption. Operations can sort out the politics on the ground." His finger slid across the radio panel. He called the controller and requested a turn back, voice calm and professional. To the outside world, it sounded like any other precautionary return. Inside the cockpit, it felt like a line being drawn in the wrong place. A moment later, the chime sounded through the cabin as the intercom clicked on. The captain's voice flowed out, smooth and controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an issue that requires our attention on the ground, we will be returning to our departure airport. This is a precautionary measure. We appreciate your patience and cooperation." Groans and murmurs erupted instantly. Some passengers cursed under their breath. Others looked around, instinctively searching for the cause. More phones began to rise, pointed down the aisle like a forest of black mirrors. In row 3, the black CEO watched the cabin tilt slightly as the aircraft began its turn. The ops director's voice was still in his ear. "They are going back," he reported. "We saw the change in your flight path," the director answered. "Do not argue with any safety instruction. Do not leave your seat until they tell you. Once you are on the ground, we will be on the jet bridge, and we will make sure you are not the only one answering questions." The engines changed pitch. The logo on the wing flashed past his window as they banked toward home. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the absurd weight of it all. He had tried to keep this as a quiet complaint logged to be fixed after landing. The crew had chosen to make it a spectacle, to prove a point. What they did not understand yet was that grounding this plane to protect their pride had just grounded more than a flight. It had put their entire careers on final approach. The plane descended through a layer of cloud, the cabin lights brightening as the ground rose up beneath them. People peered out windows, checking their watches, muttering about missed connections and ruined meetings. Whatever issue the captain had mentioned now had a shape, and more than a few eyes kept drifting toward row 3. The black CEO sat with his belt fastened, shoulders back, phone resting dark on his thigh. He had ended the call with the ops director a few minutes earlier, after confirming that a response team would be waiting at the gate. There was nothing more to do until the wheels met the runway. Across the aisle, his neighbor exhaled sharply. "They really turned the whole plane around over this," the man said under his breath. "They think nobody is going to ask why." "Oh, they will," the CEO replied quietly. "That is the problem they just bought." Up front, the first officer completed the landing checklist with mechanical precision. Her hands were steady, but underneath a knot had settled in her stomach. Returning to origin was a defensive move, one she believed was justified. Still, the weight of that app screen she had glimpsed haunted the back of her mind. What if he really was who he said? The wheels touched down with a solid thump. Reverse thrust roared, then faded as they slowed and turned off the runway. The cabin jolted slightly, a few overhead bins rattled. As they taxied, phones lit up like small constellations, passengers already composing messages and drafting posts. In the galley, the senior attendant picked up the interphone, her voice lowered but tight. "We need to be aligned when we get to the gate," she told the crew. "The story is simple. Passenger refused instructions, made veiled threats, and created a hostile environment. We requested a return in the interest of safety. Stick to that." One of the junior attendants hesitated. "I do not know," she said softly. "He was calm the whole time I saw him. People were filming. If this blows up online and it doesn't match what we say..." The senior attendant cut her off. "Do you want to be the one who tells the company you sided with a disruptive passenger over your own crew? We saw him refuse to move. We heard him talk about consequences. That is enough." The younger woman looked down at her hands, not arguing, but not entirely convinced. At the gate, a small group had already gathered. Operations staff in badges and lanyards, 2 security officers, a woman from HR, and 1 man in a simple dark suit with no visible logo. That last one was the ops director. He stood slightly apart, watching the jet bridge with the stillness of someone who spent his life hearing about problems after they exploded. "Remember," he told the group, "we do not assume our way into this. We listen, we gather footage, we check logs, and no one talks to the media, not a word." The aircraft eased into position, brakes squeaking softly as it stopped. The familiar chime sounded, but the seatbelt sign stayed on. The captain's voice came through the speakers again, careful and controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived back at our departure airport. For now, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Ground personnel will be boarding the aircraft to assist us. We appreciate your patience." A low wave of dissatisfaction rolled through the cabin. Someone said loudly, "Assist with what?" And another answered, "With covering themselves, that is what." In row 3, the CEO slipped his phone back into his hand without unlocking it yet. He did not plan to be the first to stand, the first to shout, or the first to point a finger. He wanted the process to expose itself. The door opened with a soft hiss. Instead of a fresh set of boarding passengers, a line of company jackets stepped in, followed by the 2 security officers. Conversations flattened into a tense hush. The ops director scanned the cabin until he saw the man in the blue shirt. Their eyes met for a moment, and he gave the smallest of nods. Not a greeting, more an acknowledgement. "I see you. I know what this is." The senior attendant hurried forward, slipping into her practiced role. "Thank you for coming," she said, pitching her voice low. "We have a non-compliant passenger in premium who challenged our authority, refused seating instructions, and made threats about consequences. The first officer deemed it unsafe to proceed." The HR representative scribbled notes on a tablet. "Any physical aggression?" she asked. "Not yet," the attendant said, "but he was confrontational. We barely managed to keep it contained." Behind her, one of the security officers watched her face carefully. He had heard similar summaries before. They were not always wrong. They were not always right either. "All right," the ops director said. We will speak to him, then we will speak to you and the pilots, separately. He walked down the aisle toward row 3, aware of phones following his path. He stopped beside the CEO's seat and spoke in a tone that carried but did not boom. "Sir, my name is Randall. I oversee flight operations for this division. I understand there has been a serious problem." The CEO looked up, meeting him halfway. "There has," he said, "and it started long before someone decided to call it a safety threat." Randall nodded once. "Before we say anything else, I need to ask you a simple question in front of everyone here," he said. "Have you, at any point, refused a lawful safety instruction from this crew?" The CEO kept his voice even. "No," he answered. "I complied with every safety instruction. I moved to the seat they assigned under protest, but I moved. I stayed seated when you turned back. I have not raised my voice or touched anyone." The man in the neighboring seat lifted a hand. "That is true," he said. "I have been here the whole time. He has been calm. They moved him out of 1A for another passenger, and then treated him like he was the problem for asking about it." Across the aisle, another passenger spoke up. "I filmed the interaction at the gate," she said. "You are going to want to see it." The senior attendant's mouth tightened as the narrative she had hoped to control began slipping sideways. She glanced toward the cockpit, silently willing someone with more stripes to take over and restore the story she had framed. Randall heard the voices, the offers of recordings, the restless energy of people who felt something unfair had happened and might actually be corrected. He knew this atmosphere. It was what you felt right before a story left the cabin and hit the public. "Thank you," he told the witnesses. "We will speak with each of you and collect any video you are willing to share. For now, please remain seated until we organize the deplaning." He turned back to the CEO. "As for you, sir, I know who you are," he said quietly now, "and I give you my word, this will not be buried. But for the moment, I need you to walk with us off this aircraft so we can take formal statements." The CEO unbuckled, rising slowly, deliberately, making sure his movements could not be twisted into something they were not. "I will walk with you," he said, "on one condition." Randall arched a brow. "Which is?" "That your crew walks off too, and that they do it without uniforms deciding the story for them. Passengers first, then crew. Everyone with a phone keeps it. Everyone who wants to speak, speaks." The request was not really a request. It was a line in the sand, drawn right on the carpet of row 3. Randall hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. "Passengers will deplane first," he called down the aisle. "Crew, remain on board until instructed otherwise." This time, when the reaction surged through the cabin, it did not sound like anger alone. It sounded like a verdict starting to form. The plane had been grounded. Now it was the turn of careers to feel the same gravity. The aisle filled with the awkward shuffle of people leaving a flight that had gone nowhere. But this time, the mood was different. Passengers moved past row 3 like witnesses exiting a courtroom, not customers stepping off a plane. Some paused just long enough to squeeze the black CEO's shoulder or murmur a quiet, "You did the right thing," before continuing forward. He did not smile or grandstand, he simply inclined his head, letting them go. Each small gesture was another crack in the version of events the crew had tried to build. At the front, the senior attendant stood stiffly by the galley, jaw tight, watching the stream of passengers file past. She could feel their looks, that mix of curiosity, judgment, and something closer to disappointment. A few avoided her eyes altogether, stepping around her as if she were part of the problem, not the solution. One woman stopped and spoke just loud enough to be heard by everyone nearby. "I hope your company watches those videos," she said, "because what I saw did not look like a safety issue." Then she walked on, leaving the words hanging in the air like turbulence. The first officer stayed in the cockpit for the deplaning, listening to the sounds through the open door. Normally, she would have stood at the front with the captain, offering polite farewells, maintaining the illusion that every landing was routine. Today, she could not bring herself to face the line of people who had just been trapped in the middle of her decision. "How bad do you think this is?" she asked quietly. The captain did not answer right away. He watched the ground crew outside positioning the jet bridge, saw the small knot of executives waiting just beyond the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Bad enough that whatever you thought you were protecting is already gone. When the last passenger stepped off, the cabin felt eerily hollow. Overhead bins gaped open, discarded magazines lay crooked in seat pockets. The air carried the faint scent of anxiety and reheated coffee. Randall turned back toward the rows, focusing now on the uniforms still in place. "Crew, please remain seated in the first rows," he said. "We will speak with you one at a time." The senior attendant bristled. "With respect, we need to prepare for the next flight," she said. "We have schedules." "You do not have a next flight," he replied evenly. "Not today." The words landed like a physical object. One of the junior attendants swallowed hard, suddenly looking much younger. The first officer stepped out of the cockpit then, walking down to meet the group in the forward cabin. Randall addressed her directly. "You are the one who recommended the return?" "Yes," she answered, lifting her chin. "Based on the information I had, I believed we had a potentially disruptive passenger who would not commit to following crew instructions. I made the call to protect the flight." He nodded slowly. "And when he showed you his internal owner profile?" She hesitated, muscles tightening along her jaw. "I saw a screen," she said. "Anyone can fake an image. My training says authority in the cabin belongs to the crew and cockpit, not to whoever claims to sign paychecks." "Training also says verify before escalating," he replied. "Did you verify through operations before deciding to burn thousands of gallons of fuel and pull a full cabin back to the gate?" Silence stretched. She could feel the eyes of her crew on her, some supportive, some uncertain. "I made the best judgment I could with a crew telling me they felt threatened," she said. "If we err on the side of safety." Randall held her gaze. "No one here is questioning your commitment to safety," he said. "We are questioning whether what you labeled a safety threat was actually a challenge to your pride and your assumptions. There is a difference." Before she could answer, one of the security officers stepped in. "We need to move this off the aircraft," he said firmly. "The cabin is not the place for a full debrief." Randall nodded. He turned, gesturing to the black CEO, who had remained seated a few rows back, waiting. "Sir, we will go to a conference room just off the jet bridge," he said. "You, myself, HR, security, and any crew member involved. Passengers who volunteered footage are being escorted to a separate area to upload files and give statements." The CEO rose, walking up the aisle for the second time that day. The difference was palpable. Earlier, he had walked it as a man being treated like an intruder. Now, he walked it as someone the entire operation had suddenly rearranged itself around. As he reached the front, he paused beside the jump seat where the senior attendant sat, hands folded tightly in her lap. She met his eyes for a fraction of a second. There was fear there now, but also something else. Disbelief that the script she trusted had fallen apart this quickly. "I did not want this," he said quietly, "just for her. I wanted to land on time and file a quiet report. You chose to make it louder." She looked away first. In the corridor by the jet bridge, a line of cameras from phones and tablets tracked him as he passed. No press yet, just passengers documenting the aftermath. Snatches of conversation followed him. "I got the whole thing at the gate. The pilot talked to him like he was some kind of criminal. Did you hear what he said about owning the plane?" The conference room door closed behind them with a soft click, muting the noise from the terminal. Inside, the table was bare except for a pitcher of water and a stack of incident forms. HR sat at one end, tablet ready. Security took chairs by the wall. Randall gestured for the CEO and the first officer to sit opposite each other. "We are going to record this," he said. "Everyone gets to speak without interruption. Facts first, interpretations second. And there will be no editing after the fact. Legal will review the full raw recording." The first officer folded her hands, spine straight. The CEO leaned back slightly, composed, no longer needing to assert anything with raised volume or sharp gestures. The room knew who he was now. The question on the table was no longer, does he belong in 1A? It was, who in this operation understands what belonging means? Outside, on a dozen phones across the terminal, the first clips had already been sent to friends, group chats, and social feeds. The story was leaving the airport, carried by shaky hands and angry captions. On screen after screen, one phrase kept repeating. Black CEO denied first-class seat. Plane turned around. The internet was about to want answers, and the answers would start in this small, suddenly very quiet room. The recorder on the table blinked a small red light. Randall folded his hands in front of him, eyes moving from the black CEO to the first officer and back again. HR tapped a few fields on her tablet, then nodded that the session had started. "Let us begin with you," Randall said to the CEO. "Please walk us through what happened, from the lounge to the moment the aircraft turned back. Stick to what you saw and heard." He did not have to dig for details. They were all sitting just under his skin. "In the lounge, 2 agents questioned whether my first-class boarding pass was real," he said. "They delayed me while waving another passenger through. At the gate, the same pattern repeated. I was asked to wait. Mr. Palmer was escorted straight on as the real premium guest." HR's stylist paused. "Exact phrase?" she asked. "They said, 'We are boarding our premium guests first,' while holding me back with a raised hand," he replied. "They did not say, 'Please wait while we fix a system issue.' That story came later." Randall motioned for him to continue. "On board," the CEO said, "my paid seat, 1A, had already been given to Mr. Palmer. The senior attendant suggested the system had glitched and offered me another seat further back. When I questioned this, I was told my options were accept the seat or get off the plane and catch a later flight. There was no attempt to verify the manifest before making that ultimatum." The first officer shifted slightly in her chair, but stayed silent. "When I moved under protest," he went on, "I used our internal app to notify operations I was filing a bias and safety concern as the owner. From there, things escalated not because I shouted or refused safety instructions, but because the crew decided my refusal to quietly accept the insult was itself a threat." He described the aisle confrontation, the way she had framed his insistence as non-compliance. His voice stayed level, but the room could feel the heat under the words. "I said I would follow every lawful safety instruction," he finished. "What I would not do was give a blank check saying, 'I will never question anything you do,' after your policies had already been bent around someone else's comfort." Randall clicked his pen once, then turned to the first officer. "Your turn," he said, "in your own words." She straightened. "I was informed before takeoff that there had been a seating dispute in first class," she said. "The report I got was that a passenger had refused reassignment, argued with crew, and referenced consequences for staff. In our world, that is a red flag. Once we are in the air, any escalation can become a safety risk." She described stepping into the cabin, the stance she had taken, the questions she had asked. As she spoke, her tone carried the weary conviction of someone who had spent years being told, "If you hesitate, you might not get another chance." "I asked him for a clear commitment to follow crew instructions," she said. "He would not give a simple yes. He kept framing it with conditions and remarks about discrimination. I could not read that as full cooperation." The CEO did not interrupt, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Randall waited until she finished, then said, "When he showed you the owner profile in the internal app, what did you think?" "I thought he was using status as a weapon," she answered. "My training says authority in the cabin flows from the cockpit, not the corporate org chart. We are told not to let someone wave a title and override safety judgment."
And when operations sent a message confirming there was an owner on board who had filed a complaint, Randall asked, sliding the printed note across the table, "did that change your view?" She looked down at the paper. "It confirmed there was someone who believed he had special standing," she said carefully. "It did not change the fact that he was challenging my crew in front of other passengers. My concern was, if he is willing to do that at 10,000 feet, what happens at 35,000? The room went quiet. The HR representative broke it. "We have multiple passenger statements saying he stayed calm, never raised his voice, and complied with the seat change," she said. "We also have video from the gate and partial cabin footage. On first review, they do not show shouting or refusal of safety instructions." A flicker of something, doubt, fear, both, crossed the first officer's face. "So we have two narratives," Randall said. "One where a dangerous passenger forced a turnaround, and one where discomfort with being challenged by a black customer, who also happens to be the owner, got mislabeled as danger." He let the implication hang there. "Captain and first officer," he continued, "you always have the right to return if you believe safety is compromised. No one in this company will take that tool away from you. But we cannot allow 'I felt challenged' to quietly become 'I was in danger' every time authority is questioned. That is how bias hides inside policy." The CEO spoke again, quietly now. "I built this airline to move people, not to humiliate them," he said. "If I had been any other black man in a blue shirt without an app login, I would have been labeled disrupted, taken off, and none of this review would exist. That is what scares me more than a wasted flight." The words landed heavier than any turbulence. The recorder's red light kept blinking, capturing every syllable that would soon move far beyond this small room and decide whose careers were about to hit the ground. The red light on the recorder clicked off with a soft beep, but the weight in the room did not lift. For a moment, nobody moved. It felt less like a meeting and more like the silence after a verdict before anyone knows what the sentence will be. Randall cleared his throat. "We are going to take a short pause," he said. "HR and I need to review the initial footage and statements. Captain, first officer, senior cabin crew, please wait in the adjoining room. Do not discuss this incident among yourselves." The first officer's jaw tightened. "So we are separated now," she said quietly. "That is standard in any serious investigation," Randall replied. "You know that." She stood, the scrape of her chair loud in the small space. For the first time since she had stepped into the aisle at 30,000 feet, she looked less certain. Not broken, not defeated, but bent in a way that would not easily spring back. She followed the captain and senior attendant through the side door, leaving the CEO on one side of the table, Randall, HR, and security on the other. When the door closed, HR let out a breath she had been holding. "We have enough already to trigger a formal review," she murmured to Randall. "Passenger accounts are consistent. The gate video shows the delay and preferential boarding. The cabin clips show him calm and seated, while the narrative on the log calls him agitated." Randall nodded once. "Pull the access logs for the manifest system," he said. "I want to know exactly when they reassigned 1A and who confirmed it. And get me the audio from the operations channel between my team and the cockpit." Security rose and stepped out to coordinate with IT and ground staff. The room felt thinner without them, more intimate and more exposed at the same time. The CEO sat back, hands loosely folded. He was not triumphantly waiting for heads to roll. If anything, he looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from recognizing a pattern you had hoped your own company would outgrow. "You do not have to stay for the rest of this," Randall told him. "We can brief you later with the findings." "I am not here to gloat over punishments," the CEO said, "but I am also not walking away and letting a misunderstanding memo bury this. I want to hear, with my own ears, who takes responsibility and who hides behind procedure." HR glanced between them. "There will likely be immediate suspensions," she said carefully. "Yes," he answered. "What I want to know is whether we stop at suspensions or whether we finally admit that the way we teach safety has been quietly training people to see certain passengers as hazards before they open their mouths." There was no anger in his tone now, just a blunt, tired precision that was harder to dodge than shouting. A knock on the side door interrupted them. Security returned, carrying a tablet. "We have the gate footage ready," he said. "Audio is clear. You should see this." Randall tapped the screen. The small room filled with the image of the gate area, the CEO standing patiently with his boarding pass, the raised hand of the agent, the easy smile from Mr. Palmer. The words came through cleanly. "We are boarding our first class and premium guests now." Not yet, sir. We are boarding our premium guests first. On screen, the CEO's brows lifted a fraction. He did not argue, he simply stepped to the side as instructed. Randall watched the recording all the way through to the moment the gate agent finally waved him forward, distracted and dismissive. Bias is rarely shouted, the CEO said quietly when the clip ended. It is usually done exactly like that, polite, casual, plausible, until you stack all the little things together and see the pattern. Security switched to a cabin clip. A passenger's phone, slightly shaky, captured the first officer in the aisle, arms folded, voice carrying through the row. Last opportunity. If you cannot give me an unqualified yes, I have to treat you as a disruptive passenger. Then his answer, steady and low. I will follow every lawful safety instruction, but I will not agree to pretend that what happened at that front row did not happen. HR pressed her lips together. That is not refusal, she said. No, Randall agreed, it is not. He tapped the table lightly, as if settling something inside himself. All right, he said, bring them back in, one at a time. They started with the senior attendant. She entered with her shoulders squared, but her eyes flicked to the CEO for a split second before she sat. HR replayed the gate clip. Is there anything in this video, HR asked, that you would characterize as aggressive or non-compliant from the passenger in question? The attendant stared at the tablet, color draining from her face. No, she said eventually, not at the gate. And in the cabin, Randall asked, we have multiple witnesses stating he remained seated, did not raise his voice, and accepted the reassigned seat under protest, yet your log calls him hostile and escalating. I felt threatened, she blurted. He talked about consequences and people above my pay grade. I have seen that kind of talk before. It never ends well. For whom? The CEO asked gently. She flinched at the question. For crew, she said. People file complaints, twist words. I did not want my record destroyed because one passenger decided to make an example out of me. Randall leaned forward. So you preemptively framed him as dangerous, he said, to protect yourself from criticism? She looked down at her hands, fingers laced so tightly the knuckles had gone white. I framed him as a risk, she whispered, because in that moment, that is what he felt like. There is a difference, the CEO said, between feeling your authority challenged and actually being in danger. If you cannot tell those apart, you should not have power over who gets labeled a threat. The words were not shouted, but they landed with the force of a slammed door. When she left the room, she did not meet anyone's eyes. There was no announcement, no dramatic reading of a termination letter. But everyone present understood. Her days in that uniform were numbered. The first officer came in next, expression controlled, back straight. She watched the same clips, listened to the same words she had heard in the cabin, now stripped of adrenaline and framed in pixels. How does this look to you now? Randall asked. She took a long time answering. It looks different from how it felt, she said at last. In the air, I saw a man refusing to defer to crew authority. On screen, I see someone drawing a line against being disrespected and trying very hard not to lose his temper. And your decision to turn back? HR pressed. Her throat worked. Based only on what I see now, she said slowly, I would not have made that call. I still believe in erring on the side of safety, but I also see that my own frustration, my own defensiveness, colored what I chose to call safety in that moment. That admission matters, Randall said, but it does not erase impact. This is not going to end with retraining and a memo. You grounded a plane because your pride felt undercut. Careers will end over this. I need you to understand that includes your own. For the first time, her composure cracked. Her eyes shone, but she did not look away. I understand, she said hoarsely. If the price of keeping this job is pretending I was right, I will not pay it. I was wrong. The CEO watched her, face unreadable. This was not the righteous, easy fury people wanted in a revenge story. It was something harder, seeing the person who hurt you recognize, too late, the full shape of what they had done. Then we move forward, he said quietly. but not by convincing ourselves this was one bad day with a couple of bad actors. We changed the system that taught you that a calm black man asking for his paid seat is a bigger safety concern than your own bias." Randall nodded once, decision settling fully behind his eyes. "We will formalize the disciplinary actions," he said. "Suspension pending termination for the senior attendant. Removal from flight status for the first officer with recommendation for separation. Gate staff discipline. And then we design something bigger. Mandatory training, new oversight, a direct channel for passengers to escalate bias incidents outside the crew chain." He turned to the CEO. "You wanted consequences," he said. "You are about to get them. Not just for the people in this room, but for anyone who thinks safety is a shield for discrimination." The CEO exhaled slowly, some of the tension in his shoulders finally easing. "Good," he said, "because I am not interested in a private apology. I am interested in making sure the next black man in a blue shirt does not have to own the airline just to be treated like he belongs in his seat." News does not need boarding passes. It travels on signal bars and angry thumbs. By the time the meeting ended, the first clips from Flight 217 had already slipped beyond the airport and into the bloodstream of the internet. The first video to go truly viral was shaky and grainy. The aisle confrontation, the first officer's folded arms, the black man in the blue shirt saying, "I will follow every lawful safety instruction, but I will not pretend this did not happen." The caption did the rest. "Black CEO denied 1A. Plane turns back when he refuses to shut up." Within hours, morning shows were running the footage on a loop. Commentators dissected every frame. Some focused on the obvious headline: "A CEO grounded his own plane and ended careers." Others saw something deeper: how quickly routine authority turned defensive when a black passenger refused to shrink. At headquarters, the crisis team took over a glass-walled conference room. Screens glowed with live coverage, social feeds, and internal reports. Randall sat near the front, dark circles under his eyes, as legal and PR laid out the options. "We could frame this as an isolated incident," one PR executive suggested carefully. "Emphasize that we acted swiftly once we learned the facts. Say the system worked." "The system did not work," the CEO said from the doorway. No one had heard him come in. Conversations stopped. "I had to be on that plane, with a private app and a direct line to operations, just to avoid being dragged off as a threat. That is not a system. That is a loophole with my name on it." He stepped into the room, not in a suit for once, but in the same plain shirt from the flight. Someone muttered that it was a smart visual choice. He was not thinking about visuals. He was thinking about every black traveler watching the story and measuring it against their own memories. "There will be a press conference," he said. "We will not hide behind boilerplate. We will acknowledge what happened publicly. We will name bias as a safety issue, and we will announce what we're changing." Legal shifted uneasily. "If you admit fault this explicitly, the liability..." "The liability already exists," he cut in. "The video is the admission. The only question now is whether we look like we understand what we did wrong or like we are the last ones to get it." He laid out the framework he had worked on in his head while the plane was turning. A new program that went beyond standard diversity workshops and laminated cards. Mandatory bias and de-escalation training tied directly to promotion and retention. Independent review panels with passenger representation for any incident involving race or identity. An anonymous escalation line that bypassed crew logs entirely and routed directly to a dedicated team. And one more thing, he added, we shift the definition of disruptive passenger in our manuals. It cannot be a catch-all phrase for person who made me uncomfortable by not accepting my mistake. We separate emotional discomfort from true safety risk. And we audit every removal for patterns, names, demographics, routes, crew. Someone on the far side of the table frowned. "You are talking about a complete culture reset," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Exactly." The press conference came the next afternoon. Reporters packed the room. cameras lined up on tripods, microphones bristling on the podium. The leaked title was already trending. Black CEO grounds plane, ends careers. People expected a polished, damage-controlled speech. They got something rougher. He walked up without notes, adjusted the mic, and looked straight into the first row of lenses. 2 days ago, he began, I boarded one of my own company's flights as a paying passenger and was told in a dozen subtle ways that I did not belong in the seat I had bought. He recounted the story from the lounge to the gate, from row 1 to row 3, from quiet protest to a bank of cloud turning back. He did not embellish. He did not need to. The facts had already played worldwide in pixels. What matters now, he said, is not that this happened to a CEO. What matters is that it could have happened to any black traveler, any person who does not fit someone's picture of who belongs in the front of the plane.
If I had not owned the jet, the story today would likely be about a disruptive passenger removed for safety, and most people would have believed it. He outlined the disciplinary actions without glee, simply and clearly. Crew suspended and moving toward termination, pilots removed from flight status, facing separation, gate staff under review. Then he described the program they would launch, calling it a Dignity and Safety Initiative. From now on, he said, we treat dignity as a safety requirement, not as a courtesy we offer when convenient. Because when people in power can label their discomfort as danger, real danger gets harder to see. A reporter raised a hand. Some will say you overreacted, she said, that you ruined careers over what could have been solved with an apology and a voucher. He paused. In another life, another era, maybe he would have taken that bargain. Quiet settlement, no headlines, no program. Today, with a cabin full of witnesses and a screen full of comments asking the same question, would this have happened if he were white, that path was gone. I did not end those careers, he said slowly. The choices made on that flight did. I am just refusing to pretend otherwise. Later, alone in his office as the sun slid down behind the towers, he watched the clips again, not of the confrontation, but of passengers stepping off the grounded plane. The woman said, I hope your company watches those videos. The man promised to tell the truth if anyone asked. He thought about all the times in his life when no one had pulled out a phone, when no one had spoken up. About the quiet, invisible flights that had carved grooves into his patience long before this one. The notification chime broke his focus. New message from operations. Early data from the Dignity Program pilot. Complaint rates down. Positive feedback up. Removal decisions under heavier scrutiny. The hard work had begun, and it was already reshaping daily routines in ways most passengers would never see. He leaned back, letting out a breath that felt like it had been trapped since the first gate agent raised a hand and said, Not yet, sir. Maybe there would always be someone ready to decide he did not belong up front. But after Flight 217, anyone making that decision inside his airline would know one thing for certain. If they tried to turn their bias into a safety story, he would not just ground their plane, he would ground the story and rebuild the rules from the runway up. Months later, Flight 217 lived on, not in the sky, but in conference rooms, training modules, and whispered conversations in break rooms. The grainy aisle clip had been scrubbed of passenger faces and turned into an internal case study. In classrooms with rows of plastic chairs and tired coffee, crews watched themselves in a mirror that did not flatter. On one screen, the familiar scene played. A black man in a blue shirt, sitting upright, voice steady, saying he would follow every lawful safety instruction. The first officer in the aisle, arms folded, demanded an unqualified yes. The subtle stiffening of the senior attendant behind her. The words, disruptive passenger, typed into a digital log like a stamp that could not be removed. In the back of one such room, a new hire flight attendant named Leela watched with a knot in her throat. She had joined the airline after the scandal broke, lured oddly by the promise that they were changing from the inside. The instructor paused the video at the moment the CEO mentioned discrimination. "Tell me what you see," he said. The usual answers came first. Tension, a challenge to authority, a situation that could escalate. Leela raised her hand, surprising herself.
"I see a passenger trying very hard not to lose control," she said, "and a crew that has already decided what kind of problem he is before he opens his mouth." The instructor nodded. "That's the pivot," he said. "Before Flight 217, most of our training would have sided automatically with the crew here. If you feel unsafe, return. If a passenger challenges you, document them as a risk." Now we're asking a harder question. Did you feel unsafe because there was real danger, or because your bias and pride were poked? He clicked forward to the next segment, a split screen of the cabin footage and the later interview with the first officer. Her admission played in text at the bottom. "Based only on what I see now, I would not have made that call." This, he said quietly, is what accountability looks like when it's honest. Careers ended because of this day, not because we hung anyone out to dry, but because we could not let "I felt disrespected" masquerade as "I feared for safety" anymore. Across campus, in a smaller office with no windows, the former senior attendant stared at an employment form for a different industry entirely. She had managed to avoid the news for a while, but the story kept looping back. Friends sent links with cautious emojis. Strangers in interviews recognized her voice from the audio and went chilly mid-conversation. She had replayed her own choices so many times that the scenes blurred. The hand raised at the gate. The assumption that status meant more important guest. The way she had said "we" when she meant "me." What stung most now was not the public anger. It was the quiet line from the CEO in the galley before he stepped off. "You chose to make it louder." In another part of the city, the former first officer sat at a kitchen table littered with manuals and legal pads. She had agreed to appear anonymously in a documentary about aviation culture. Her face in shadow, voice altered, but her words clear. "I was not a monster," she said into the microphone. "I was a pilot who had been told for years that any challenge to crew authority was a seed of disaster. We were never taught to ask, 'Am I being challenged because I'm wrong?' We were taught to see that question itself as danger." The interviewer asked, "Do you think losing your job was fair?" She stared at the table, fingers resting on an old pair of wings she could not bring herself to throw away. "Fair is not the word I'd use," she said. "Necessary is. If keeping the badge means never admitting you called bias safety, then I probably shouldn't have had it anymore." Back at the airline, the Dignity program moved from headlines to routine. On a flight from the same airport to another city, a man in work boots and a faded jacket stepped up to the gate with a first-class boarding pass. The agent glanced at his clothes, then at the screen. For a heartbeat, the old reflex twitched. Maybe he's in the wrong line. Then the Flight 217 module flashed in her memory like a warning light. She smiled, scanned the pass, and said, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Chen. You're in 2A today. We'll board you with our first group." No raised hand, no wait to the side, just a simple honoring of what was already true. On board, when a seating mix-up arose between two premium passengers, the crew followed a new script. Verify first, assume nothing, apologize clearly for mistakes, never threaten removal over a seat dispute alone. The words "disruptive passenger" stayed out of the log. The plane left on time. No one outside that cabin would ever know how close it had come to being another story. In his office, the CEO read the latest internal audit summary. Over the past quarter, removals for behavior had been cut in half. Complaints alleging discrimination had dropped, but detailed reports of near misses, crew catching their own bias before it hardened into action, had gone up. That spike, oddly, was the data point that made him exhale. It meant people were finally seeing what they had once edited out of their own memories. He looked up at a framed photo on the wall, not of a jet, but of a boarding door half open, sunlight streaming onto the threshold between jet bridge and cabin. Someone had snapped it years ago, thinking it was just a pretty angle. Now it felt like a symbol, the place where decisions got made about who truly belonged on the other side. Flight 217 had never left the ground, but in grounding it, he had forced an entire company to see that the most dangerous turbulence was not always in the air. Sometimes it lived in the quick, quiet choice to lift one customer through and hold another back, all while calling it safety. The next time he flew out of that airport, there were no cameras waiting, no quiet clusters of phones aimed at the gate. It was a gray morning, the kind that made the terminal windows look like frosted glass. Business as usual on the departure board. The black CEO moved through security with his carry-on, same bland blue shirt, same easy stride. At the lounge entrance, the agent scanned his pass, glanced at the screen, and then looked up at him directly. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said, using his name without a hint of surprise. "You're in 1A today. Boarding for your flight will start in about 20 minutes. Would you like a quiet corner or something closer to the desk in case there are any changes?" "A quiet corner is fine," he answered. There was no hand held up in front of him, no subtle "not yet" while someone else sailed past. Just a simple recognition of what was printed on the manifest. He sat by the window, watching tugs and fuel trucks crawl across the tarmac. Every so often, a jet nosed up to the gate, doors opening, people spilling out with the same mixture of relief and annoyance that had always defined air travel. The world had not transformed. Weather still caused delays. Engines still needed inspection. People still got impatient. But somewhere in the background of those routines, a different set of checks now ran quietly. Logs reviewed for patterns, crew debriefs that asked harder questions, training modules that did not flinch from the word bias. You couldn't see those processes from the gate. That was the point. Passengers shouldn't have to. At the boarding call, he joined the small line for first class. Ahead of him, a young black traveler in a hoodie and worn jeans shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the screen above the podium, then down at his phone, then back again. His boarding pass clearly showed 2C. The agent smiled as he stepped up. "Mr. Jackson, welcome," she said. "You're in 2C. You're welcome to board now with our first group." He hesitated for a heartbeat, as if waiting for the catch. When none came, he nodded and moved down the jet bridge, shoulders loosening a fraction. The CEO watched the small exchange, then handed over his own pass. The scanner beeped, the monitor showed 1A, and the agent simply said, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Cole." On board, the cabin felt familiar in all the ways it always had. Soft lighting, narrow aisles, the low murmur of people settling in. But there were changes here too, if you knew where to look. A laminated card tucked into the galley binder labeled Dignity and Safety Protocol. A small notation on the crew briefing sheet reminding them, verify before reassignment, document facts, not feelings. He stowed his bag, sat down in 1A, and watched Jackson stop briefly beside his row. The younger man glanced at the seat number, then at him. Recognition flickered. The story from months ago had clearly found its way into his feed. "Excuse me," Jackson said quietly, leaning in just enough so their words would not carry. "Are you the guy from that flight, the one who turned the plane around?" He almost laughed at how the legend had condensed itself. "I am the guy who refused to move out of his seat," he said. "The turning around came later." Jackson's mouth tugged into a grin. "Whatever you did," he said, "my mom sent me that video like 5 times. Said, this is why you don't ever let anyone act like you snuck into the front of the plane. Just wanted to say thanks." "Make sure you still follow the safety brief," the CEO replied, a hint of dryness in his tone. "I did not rewrite physics, just some policies." Jackson chuckled and moved on to 2C, sliding into his seat with a little more ease than before. The crew moved through their checks. The lead attendant, new to the airline since the reforms, stopped at his row. There was a flicker of nervousness in her eyes, but it was not the old kind that saw him as a threat. It was the awareness of someone who knew exactly who sat in 1A and what his presence meant. "Mr. Cole," she said, "if there's anything about the service today that doesn't match our standards, we'd appreciate hearing it directly, good or bad." "You'll hear it," he said, "but if we're lucky, it will be boring feedback. Boring is underrated." She smiled at that, tension easing. "Boring flights are my favorite kind," she agreed, and moved on. As the plane pushed back and the engine spooled up, he looked out at the curve of the wing. Somewhere, there were still people grumbling that he had ruined good careers over a seat dispute. Others called him a hero for ending those careers, as if the story were just a clean act of revenge. The truth, he knew, sat somewhere in between. He had not been trying to end anyone. He had been trying to end a way of thinking that made humiliation an acceptable part of the boarding process, as routine as checking a bag. The careers that fell had been built, in part, on that way of thinking. They could not survive in the new air. The runway blurred beneath them, then dropped away. The city shrank, the clouds rose to meet them. He felt the familiar press of acceleration in his chest, and underneath it, something lighter. Flight 217 would always be the headline. The day a black CEO was denied his first-class seat and, 12 minutes later, turned a plane around and set off a chain that reached from the cockpit to the comment sections. But sitting in 1A on a completely different flight, he understood the real measure of what had changed. It was not that he was finally treated like he belonged up front. It was watching a stranger in a hoodie and scuffed shoes walk past a gate agent, boarding pass in hand, and never once be told, even between the lines, that the seat waiting for him was meant for someone else.